Good evening. Welcome. This is our TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments. I'm going to be your host for this event. I'm Ruth Casey. I live in Kentucky. Glad to be here. We find ourselves in the middle of Financial Literacy Week today for this live event, so that's going to be the topic. And the session you've tuned in for is called Where Did All My Money Go? So can't wait to find out more about that from our presenters. As we begin here, we're going to practice with the WebEx chat features if you'd like to. Try that out. Give a shout out to people joining in tonight. Depending on the device that you're using, you may find the chat in a different place, or it might not be an option that's available to you. So just look at the chat. I always like to read up and down the chat and to see what other people are sharing, some other responses. All right, got some different locations here. Thank you for doing that. Going to be using the chat panel tonight for questions and comments throughout the session. If you are a social media activist, then go ahead and feel welcome to share what you're learning today. We have two amazing and talented presenters with us tonight. Mike Houston and Lindsay Gold will be leading the session. So why don't you tell us about yourself? Lindsay, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Lindsay Gold, and I am from Dayton, Ohio. I teach at the University of Dayton the math methods for teachers that want to do elementary pre-K through grade 5, as well as the educational technology courses, and I am a T-Cube National Instructor.
Thanks, Lindsay. Mike?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us. We're excited to have you here. I'm Mike Houston, and I teach algebra, calculus, and statistics in a really small rural school just outside Pittsburgh. And I am also a T-Cube National Instructor.
All right. And if you're a Tuesday night regular joining our webinars or watching them on demand, you might recognize Mike. He's usually the host on Tuesday, but tonight we're treated to him being one of the presenters. So thank you so much. A reminder, the session is being recorded. It'll be available for viewing or even reviewing later. If you experience audio or video issues that you can't resolve during the live session, just feel free to come back and watch it later.
All right. Well, let's get started. Hold on. Sorry.
I think you might be the clicker or the clicky.
I am. Things are loading a little bit slower right now.
It's the way it can go sometimes.
So I think we're going to start things off. I'm going to talk about the agenda for tonight. And so we started our welcome introductions, and Lindsay's going to start by talking about what's all the fuss? Like, how did we get here? Why are we talking about financial literacy as much as we are more recently? And then we're going to definitely dive into some activities that involve connections with math and financial literacy specific for taxes. And I think you're going to find that those are going to span like a middle grades, algebra 1, maybe algebra 2 content. We're going to also talk a little bit about income tax brackets tonight. And then be sure to stick around because at the end, Ruth is going to be giving away 2 different webinar drawings. Normally we do 1, but we have a little extra something for you tonight. So one lucky winner is going to receive a TI graphing calculator of their choice. And the other lucky winner is going to get a book that Lindsay and myself and Johnny Ashurst and Jenny Bay Williams co-authored. Speaking of Johnny Ashurst, I want to make sure that I give due due credit. Johnny worked really hard as well in the planning of this webinar. So thank you, Johnny, for your work on this webinar. And Lindsay, you want to talk through hopefully what we can expect to have done tonight?
Sure. Our expected outcomes, or in elementary world, we like to say our I can statements. I can help students experience important financial topics such as taxes. I can encourage students to improve discourse of financial concepts, and I can become more aware of the resources where I can access pre-made activities to use with my students. But more importantly, I hope you can learn something. I know I did when preparing for this webinar, so I hope you find that as well.
Awesome. All
We
right.
also want to give a special shout out to Next Gen Personal Finance. If you are not aware of this organization, please check into it. A lot of the content that we pulled from today to partner with is from Next Gen, and we had the opportunity to meet Christian. So if Christian, you are on tonight, we want to say welcome and thank you for reaching out to us. He's the Director of Growth and Advocacy at NGPF. And we look forward to working with him as well as others at the company just to combine more of the curriculum with the TI technology. All right, so financial literacy and its importance. How did we get here? To give you a little bit of background on financial literacy, it started to catch on in the recent years, but currently gain a little bit momentum, but we still have a little bit of a ways to go. Some of the trends that I kind of wanted to talk about real quick. According to the Next Gen Personal Finance 2023 State of Financial Education Report, at the time when this was written, 17 states were guaranteed a personal finance course for all public high school students. But as of today, we can now make that 18 because West Virginia has been added on there. But still, we have a ways to go. About a quarter of our students have access to financial education, but the majority still only have access to an elective course or where it's embedded throughout the curriculum and it's not a separate course. Though it's growing in priority, there's still gaps in guaranteed access. They still persist along racial, socioeconomic, and geographic lines. So those are things that we continue to overcome as we try to keep this wave going and increasing financial literacy across the country.
And I just put a little statement in the chat, or I guess more of a question. This is, I just am curious how many of us on tonight were required whenever we went through high school to have a personal finance or financial literacy course. And I'm trying to remember back, Lindsay, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't required. I think I took one, but I don't think I was required to for graduation. What about you?
I did not. I didn't even take a course. So I actually, thank goodness for my father, who is very financially literate and taught me things. But otherwise, when it came to school, I did not have a designated course.
Yeah, I don't think that we're in the minority on that.
No.
So I was kind of thinking about some things. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I started thinking about them and money and like how do I, especially like taxes. I think taxes are uniquely challenging to explain and get people to appreciate and understand. So just start thinking about what type of tax your own students might be familiar with, but we're going to try to sort of get like a waterfall effect happening in the chat. So go ahead and type your answer in, but don't hit enter. We want to sort of give everyone time to think. And while you're kind of thinking about what your students might say and typing, I'll just give you a couple things that I do with my 5 and 7-year-olds that I've learned from other family members. One is called a daddy tax. So my 5 and 7-year-olds, if they were here right now, they would tell you exactly what the daddy tax is. And the daddy tax is whenever I get them something, whether it be something they want, especially like food, French fries, things like that. I usually take a couple and they usually get upset. I said, well, that's the daddy tax. But this idea that, they have this whole thing that they want, and oh, some of it got taken away, and that I'm calling that a tax. So just trying to start that vocabulary, that language with them early, because I don't, again, remember my parents. Lindsay and I were talking about this before we went on tonight, that I don't remember my parents having a lot of these financial conversations or vocabulary. It just wasn't part of our dialogue around the table. Um, and then sales tax. So my daughter got a rude awakening the other day about this, because she really wanted this Barbie doll thing, and she has been saving. So like she's excited about that, and she had saved enough money after doing some chores and gotten some money for the holidays. And it was $30. It was $29.99, so $30 in her mind, and she'd saved it up. We counted it. She was ready to go. We went to the store to go buy this Barbie doll thing, and she loves like scanning things and setting things up on the conveyor belt, and then like helping pay. And so we're ready to go, and it was like $33 and some odd cents or something like that. And she was like, "Well, here's my $30," and I'm like, "Well, you don't have enough." And she's like, "What do you mean? We just did this whole thing for the past couple of months. Like, what do you mean I don't have enough?" So just trying to explain to her about sales tax, and that really threw me for a loop, because like how do I explain why we even have sales tax to my 5-year-old? And that was a new challenge for me. Gas tax. I live really close to the Ohio border. I know, Lindsay, you're in Ohio. We normally drive. Ohio's about 10 minutes from me, and we'll drive past a number of gas stations to get to a gas station in Ohio, because the gas tax in Ohio is a lot cheaper than the gas tax in Pennsylvania. For me, it's usually at least a 50 cents per gallon savings, and for a 10-minute drive, like I've figured that out, that's worth it for us. Um, so, again, my son and daughter ask questions like, I'm like, well, we have to go get gas. And they're like, well, what about that gas station or that gas station or that? I'm like, well, I want to go to this one. Well, why do you want to go to that one? So we've talked about that. And then the last was this really most recent conversation that I really had trouble with. And this doesn't involve taxes necessarily. It certainly could have taken that turn. But my parents are both retired, and my wife's parents are both still working. And so my kids were wondering why Grandma and Pap don't have to work and they can still spend a lot of their money, and why Mimi and Papa still work and spend money. So why is one set of parents working and the other set of parents isn't? And so I was trying to walk that uh, delicately, so I didn't insult or negatively put the light on any set of parents, certainly. Anyway, so I think the magic word for tonight for the chat window is going to be Uncle Sam. So Uncle Sam, so go ahead and press enter. Hopefully you had time to think about what your students might say. And then Lindsay, hopefully we're getting some stuff just flooding in. And I'm just wondering, what are some common things that you're seeing that students might be familiar with the word tax?
Lots of sales tax, income tax, some no tax, which could definitely be too. Lots of sales tax, food tax. Yeah, that definitely, at least is my experience. Sales tax is really, really where it's at. When I had to teach my girls a little bit with the same kind of thing that Hattie was experiencing going to the store, they could do 10%. They understood 10%. So even though tax wasn't 10%, I said, just tack on 10%. It's an easy number that you can figure out to kind of get an idea of what the tax might be. So we've been practicing that one for a while.
And
Gas, yes.
I know that you said your girls. For those of you that don't know Lindsay, she's lucky enough to have triplets, and now they're a little bit older. I think they're now teenagers. But
Exceeding.
thinking back,
Talk
looking
about a
back on
new financial literacy experience.
it, I can't imagine. But thinking back, whenever they were really young, what were some things that you did to kind of like, I'm doing a daddy tax thing. So what are some things that you did to kind of get the financial bug started with them?
Sure. So before they, truly understood a lot about financial literacy, we did the 3 jars. So we had our save, our spend, and our share jar. And that was just a basic watered down way to teach them as money comes in, as you get money, whether it be birthday money or you've done a chore or you made money somehow, that we want to save some of that. So the majority of that money needs to go in the save jar. But then you also have your spend jar. So if you're trying to save up for something that you might want to spend later, you can put that in that jar with the intent to spend it. And then the share jar was, we attended a church, and so they would take money to church, or if they would share with each other, one of the sisters needed something, so they would share things with each other, but they were learning about giving as well. So that was my basic way to get them started on things. But until I myself really got immersed into it, I didn't realize how important those conversations were. So thankfully, early enough, we have had those conversations. And now that they're 16 and driving and figuring out paying for gas and such, they are really using some of those things they've learned in the past to try to help them with their own finances.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into an activity. I pulled this from the Next Gen Personal Finance website on a unit titled Fraction and Tax Dollars. I love that whenever I went there, and we'll visit the website here in a little bit, but I love that whenever I went there, it was really easy for me to say, oh, this is definitely something that I could use in my classroom quickly. So let's just kind of think about the first question there. In general, why does the US government collect taxes? So go ahead and think, but don't hit enter yet. So just think about why the US government collects taxes. I just filed my taxes a couple weekends ago.
As did I. If you have not yet, the date is coming up. It works out that April is Financial Literacy Month.
All right, Uncle Sam. Maybe I didn't give you enough time.
Pay for roads, public services, military, public works, protect us from foreign invaders, shared services, lots of special programs, things that support others.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And let's say that was a conversation I want to have with my students. That would probably be more than just probably a 10-second, hey, why do we collect taxes? And then just list it, because each of those that you all mentioned, we could drill down and start explaining like the subcategory for each of those, and just how much we can think of that might be involved in just each of those. And some of those things are probably really expensive to do. All right, so let's think about the second bullet point there, the opinion. Do you think the average American household would be better off or worse off if they got to keep all of their income rather than pay taxes? And then try and do a succinct, short why. So just think and then start typing. Um, while you're thinking typing, Lindsay, I'll just share that I don't know what maybe even like your girls would think about this, but I can think back to like my teenage self, and I knew that I was working really hard and I wanted to keep my money. I didn't want, you know, the government to skim whatever percent off the top. I was like, well, I worked, like I could do the math, figure out, okay, I make at that time it was probably like $5 an hour because I'm a little bit
Right.
older.
Right.
And I could multiply that out and figure out how much I was supposed to get, and I would get my paycheck, and I'm like, it was like a want. So just kind of curious how people would feel about this. I think it would be a good question for students.
Yeah, especially because they're kind of new to the idea of paychecks and pay stubs and seeing where all that money is allotted. And yeah, their feelings on, wait a minute, except they make a little bit more now than we did with our $5 or $6 an hour.
I know. Well, it's also more expensive to pay
Absolutely.
for those same things. Last night I went to bed thinking about this webinar, and I know I'm strange. And I remember thinking, because going through my head was that the gas tax. And I remember I was so excited because my senior year, I could drive like 15 minutes down the road and there was one gas station left that was selling gas for 99 cents a gallon. And like it blew my mind. I had this little Honda at the time and I could fill it up for like $10 or $11 or something. It was just crazy. Anyway, all right. Uncle Sam, let's see what we have. So I just saw worse off, but what else do we
Yeah,
have,
I've seen
Lindsay?
quite a bit worse off. Lots of good reasoning. We have a better. So lots of good reasoning out there. Why? And that's really the thing is you just want to get your students thinking. What are they thinking? What do they know about? What don't they know about?
I always like to share this too, whenever we talk about like government services. The teacher across the hall from me is a personal finance teacher, and so the other day he was talking about Medicaid. They're trying to create a balanced budget, which is really tough to do. So a lot of teenage students that we have, they're like, oh, we don't need Medicaid and or Medicare. And so, whenever you're maybe 15 or 16, it's really easy to say, oh, we don't, who cares about that? That's not a big deal. And so, we can make the argument, well, what about the people that are on it? A lot of, you know, older, your grandmas, your grandpas, a lot of them might be on that. You don't care about, their health or their long-term health. And I always like to throw in a quick anecdote that I never expected. I never expected to care a whole lot, at least for the majority of my lifetime, about Medicare or Medicaid. And unfortunately, my son developed a pretty serious condition of epilepsy. And so we spent lots of time in the hospital, like week-long, 2-week-long stays. And we have pretty good insurance, especially as a teacher where I teach. And after my insurance picked up, we still got a $70,000 hospital bill. And so thankfully, Pennsylvania is a loophole state. Normally, Medicaid, Medicare is based on income. Pennsylvania, it's not. That was news to me. I didn't know that. And epilepsy is one of the diagnoses that you're allowed to get and apply for Medicaid if you have a certain diagnosis. So it was amazing. I was able to hand that bill over to Medicaid and they handled it because I never thought that I would need to come up with $70,000 for my son's medical care. So these are just things that um, I don't know. I think they're important stories to tell because again, I never had heard that story from anyone or anything similar, and so I didn't care about Medicare or Medicaid whenever I was younger. It didn't matter. I wanted that money put elsewhere. So
Yeah.
anyway, so anything else before we move on to that third bullet point?
I don't think so. Just so you might have noticed, a lot of our activities we talked about comes from Next Gen. So down in the bottom, you'll see, where those certain activities were inspired from or that we use curriculum from, just so you know.
And those are free activities, I believe.
They are, which is wonderful about that curriculum is that yes, you can access it. They have like programs and things for teachers, so you can take trainings and those kinds of things, but this curriculum is free for you to use.
Nice. And so tonight, isn't going to be, I know that this is a webinar featuring Texas Instruments, but the nice thing about their materials is they're not super specific to one particular technology. You really can use lots of different technologies and still be successful with it. So tonight we're going to be switching back and forth between two different TI technologies, and maybe you have one or the other. We'll see which one you might prefer, but we are going to be switching between a couple of different technologies. So, I talk with my students all the time, especially my Algebra 1 students, about fractions, decimals, and percents. Lindsay, I don't know if this happens in the state of Ohio, probably not. It might just be a Pennsylvania thing. But my students, a lot of times in Algebra 1, they make strong arguments that a fraction, a decimal, a percent are three completely different numbers, that they are not related at all.
Unrelated.
you
Yeah.
know, and it's really hard to kind of get them to break that idea. So we want to talk about 7 out of 20 students in this class had income tax withheld from their paychecks. So first, let's just do a little TI-84 here. So I could do, what was it, 7 out of 20. And if I just
Right.
press enter, so it gives me 7 out of 20 back. And I always like to remind myself and remind my students that is that what I expected? In this case, it is, because 7/20 doesn't reduce. And since my input, since what I asked the calculator to do, the calculation was exact, it's going to try and give me an exact calculation back. So I think I can go back to my alpha y equals and
Mike, I don't mean to interrupt you. Are you trying to share your screen for
yeah,
the calculator?
yes,
Okay.
thanks.
Yes,
This is
absolutely.
this is my first time on a webinar, so uh, let's try this one more time. There we go. Okay, so I asked my T84 to handle 7 out of 20, and it gave me 7 out of 20 back, and that makes sense because it's an exact input, gave me an exact output. And I thought, what if I want that represented as a decimal? If I go back into my alpha y equals, the last choice there is a toggle between fraction and decimal. And I think I can just press enter because it already has my answer of 7/20 stored. And so it can represent that as a decimal. And then I always like to ask my students, well, okay, if I want to make this a percent, what numbers are important in percents? How do we represent them? And so I'm hoping some of my students would say, well, we could just multiply this by 100 to make that a percent. So uh, if you don't have that alpha y equals, by the way, this math print is really nice. It's on one of the latest update, I believe, or one of the more recent updates of the T84, which is something that's free on our website. All right, so let's get back to about that. So 7 out of 20, 35%. So 35% of the students in the class had income tax withheld. So I don't know about, again, you, Lindsay, I'm guessing there's some vocab there that we'd have to talk to students about. So I love this idea of connecting math. So we have this idea that, working with fractions, decimals, percents, but within that context, we're also using financial literacy uh, topics to sort of push and drive that math content. So what do you think would be some vocab that your students might stumble with?
So myself, I mean, you're welcome to put this in the chat, what you all think. They might not understand what that means, withheld. What do you mean the tax is withheld? Um, and income tax in itself, what does that mean? Those kinds of things.
And what kind of income tax? Are we talking about state
Right.
income tax, federal income tax, right? So probably need to maybe be a little more specific or leave it more open-ended like that and then have that conversation with our students, federal versus state and different types of income tax. The other thing that I thought that sort of popped into my head whenever I saw this was if 7 out of 20 students in that class had income tax withheld, so 35%, then the remainder, 65%, didn't have income tax withheld. And so like what could they possibly be doing? How are they working and not having their income tax withheld? And the only thing that popped into my head about that was just students that happen to have a job where they work under the table or not on the books. I don't know if there was anything else that you had thought of, how else you could have a job where you're not having your income tax withheld as a student.
Right, especially like my daughter she actually has her own baking business and baking company where she bakes cupcakes and sells them. And one of the things we talked about was she's like, do I need to pay tax on that money that I make? And that's how we ended up looking up to see how much money do you have to make in order to pay tax and those kinds of things. So I think of things like that, teenagers, if they're mowing lawns, if they're babysitting, doing things like that, they might have experience with where they're not actually getting a pay stub, that they might then not be paying taxes.
Awesome. All right, so a lot of questions on this this next slide, this talking about specifically federal income tax. Let's focus on that. So first one we're going to talk about in 2022, 40% of taxpayers owed no federal income tax or received tax credits back from the government. And then first of all, it's 40% a rational number. So again, I don't know if you find yourself in this situation, but on a somewhat regular basis, whether it be my statistics, my calculus, or my algebra classes, I'm constantly relooping, talking about number sense and for instance, rational numbers. So I have to remind them, okay, what makes something a rational number? So is 40% a rational number? And then why or why not? So let's just do a quick get you up and out of your seats. So in your chat window, don't even wait for the Uncle Sam. Is 40% a rational number? Give me
And
the
Mike, a couple people have asked about links to the activities. Will those be located somewhere for them?
yeah. So I would actually, whenever we look at in a few minutes here, we'll actually go to the next gen site and we'll take a look. I've sort of picked pieces that I really like from a lesson. I've yet to do one whole start to finish lesson with my classes, and that's not a knock on next gen. It's just what I've found and where I'm at with my classes that I'm like, oh, this is a great question that I can ask today. And sometimes it's not for me, at least right now. It's not like, oh, let me just grab this entire lesson and take a day or take whatever it would be, 2 days to get through the content. It might be like a warm up or just we're doing something that's going to involve numbers today. So let's just have a really quick reminder about rational numbers, for instance. Well, how can we do that? We can do it lots of different ways, but why not use some sort of context of finance to discuss that and have a possible, 2-minute conversation about that. Again, just increasing that dialogue with students.
Absolutely.
So I'm seeing, I think, lots of yeses,
Yes.
and a lot of them are because 40% can be expressed different ways. And so that's a good reminder of, okay, in order to be a rational number, it has to be able to be expressed a specific way or two. And then again, getting students to think about equivalent fractions, right? Like I think that's great. They probably do that early on, certainly earlier than my high school students probably get that, but it's also something that they probably might have forgotten over the years. So just getting them to think about what are some equivalent fractions of 40%. All right, number two. Also during 2022, 16.5% of households paid no federal income taxes and no payroll taxes. Payroll taxes are specific taxes that contribute towards paying into the funds for Social Security and Medicare. So what's one way you could write that percent as a fraction instead? And I like that it's 16.5%, not just 16% or 17%. So I like that it adds that extra decimal place of accuracy to kind of get students to think, okay, how does that change things? What changes, what doesn't? Lindsay, we had this conversation earlier about like our paycheck and like what it means for something to be a federal income tax versus payroll tax. And what did we finally decide? I forget.
Yeah, so we were talking about FICA and such and what that means. And I always laughed because I was a Friends watcher and I remember Rachel getting her first paycheck and who is FICA and why do they get all my money? Which kind of was our inspiration for the title on this. So going back to what did you ask me again about the federal and the
Yeah, so like
tax?
I was sort of thinking back because our payroll system where I teach changed over the past year, and I'm now noticing, now that I'm actually looking at my paycheck, that the way that the deductions are listed changed. It used to be just listed, I think, FICA, and I mean, I'm full disclosure, I am not a financial literacy expert, even though Lindsay and I are up here, sharing our screens. I still have a lot to learn, and I like learning about it. I like talking about it, but I'm not an expert. So I will be completely honest and let you know that I had to look up FICA because I forgot what it stood for. But I noticed that FICA is no longer listed on my pay stub under deductions. I see things like Social Security, um, federal income tax is explicitly listed. Uh, Medicare is explicitly listed, where before I think those were all lumped under FICA before, I believe.
Federal Insurance Contributions Act. I wrote that down because I remember us talking about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, just getting students to get in that mindset of fractions and percents. So let's move to number 3. Because this, I thought I knew this, and I'm like, yeah, I know this. This is an easy question. And then I started thinking a lot about it. I'm like, maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't know. So go ahead and read number 3, and then think about which is going to be, which portion of Americans, which is larger, which number is larger, the proportion of Americans who paid no federal income tax, or the portion of Americans who paid no federal income tax and no payroll tax. So hold on to your chat for a minute. Go ahead and type that in, but don't press enter. And Uncle Sam. Which one's larger? So while you're typing and thinking, I thought this was an easy question, and then I had to start thinking. I'm like, oh my gosh! I'm like, we're taking 40% of like what? What's the whole? And then 16.5% of what's the whole? Because if those two wholes aren't the same, then that could certainly change our answer here of which number is actually larger. But I think this is meant to be, I think, a relatively easy question, right? It's that 40% of taxpayers that paid no federal income taxes or received tax credits back from the government is larger than the 16.5% of households who paid no federal income tax and no payroll tax. So which number is larger? The first one, the 40%. But it's that attending to precision and just reading carefully is certainly a challenge sometimes.
All right, so some more questions we had for you, just to get you thinking a little bit more about where does your money go. So in 2021, approximately what percent of federal tax dollar revenue went to healthcare? So think for just a minute, type your answer, but don't hit enter yet. What percent of federal tax dollar revenue went to healthcare?
And no cheating. I didn't cheat, and I was wrong.
Yes, I gave
So
these to
you
Mike,
can't
and I
cheat
told him he couldn't look it up. All right, Uncle Sam, let's go. What do we got here? What do we think? How much federal tax went to healthcare? Of 25, 8, 40, 15.
You guys are a lot smarter than I am. My estimate was way higher. Yeah, it just shows you how much of a non-expert I am.
Lots of good numbers. Nothing too, I forget what you said, Mike. It was higher,
We don't
but
have
I
to
don't
talk about
remember.
it. We don't have to bring that back up. It's fine.
Okay,
It
we
was
won't bring it back.
higher. It was
We won't
higher
bring it
than
back.
anyone put in the chat window by an order of magnitude.
Well, according to this activity that we found, 22% is what amount went to healthcare. So next guess in 2021, what was the second highest category? So think about this for a minute. If healthcare was the top, what would be the second highest? So take just a minute to think. what would be the second highest, do you think? So we'll go Uncle Sam. We've got some coming in, lots of military, defense.
I originally, before I had answered your because this is one of Lindsay's questions, we bounce questions off each other.
Mhm.
Whenever she asked me this question, I was thinking like military and defense. I agree with Patricia that, man, I would love for it to be education, but I don't think it is.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting when you say military and defense, normally, typically, you would be correct. However, this was 2021. So, what happened in 2021 that could have potentially skewed these numbers a little bit? Typically, military is second at 24%, but in 2021, it was actually, and Michael got this correct. I'm seeing the COVID pop up. So, Michael, what did you say? Do you remember what you said
I
was the
did.
second highest?
Yeah, unemployment, I think.
Yes, it was unemployment and labor at 21.7%. However, that is not typical. So we do say that. And when you're talking with students, you can tell them how this is not all set in stone and it changes dependent on the circumstance and the year and what is going on. So when I asked, do you think these two categories are typically number one and two? They're not. It is usually health for 29%, military around 24%. But in this case, we had something different. Now, some of you asked about education. So take a guess. What percent of the federal tax dollar revenue went to education?
It's above zero, right?
It is above zero, less than 100. All right, Uncle Sam, let's see what you have.
I see. So
485,
so far, lots
35.
of single digits.
Yep, we're seeing single digits.
Couple tens though.
Yep. Yep. These are lots of good guesses. And this was pretty much standard from 2021 to typically. So in 2021, it was actually 4.8%. We got some that are awfully close there with that. So 4.8%. So it usually is around 5%. So that is true. Very good. All right, the next thing we want to talk about are tax brackets. These were the 2022 tax brackets. So what are some questions you have about this chart, or what are some things you think your students might want to know about this chart?
I would, while people are thinking and typing, I
Okay.
thought yeah, like I would agree, vocab. I first looked at this chart and it looks right off the bat, it looks a little confusing, I think, especially if I'm going to show this to my students. Um, and I would probably right off the bat like shrink some of it down. Uh, but that's just me. I don't know. I think it looks overwhelming at first.
Yeah, and see, my first thought was, wow, how many people are making over $539,900? And what are they doing? That was my first question.
I like Diana said, why such a big jump from 12 to 22? Yeah,
We
I
did talk about
personally have
that
noticed
too.
that.
hmm
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of good questions.
How they come up with the tax brackets. I like that.
hmm
I was thinking like, do they change or has this been the tax bracket forever? Or do they have like do they change?
Yeah, lots of good questions. So we're going to get into tax brackets now, a little bit to help our students understand kind of what that means. And yeah, somebody put, are you better filing joint or separate? That's a good question too. Very
I
good questions.
actually, I, so I've had an accountant for a long time because whenever I was younger, my family owned a business. So like we had an accountant just for the business. And so whenever I was younger, my dad would just have our accountant just do my taxes because that's what my dad did. And so I didn't ask any questions and he just did them. But now it's really nice because if he thinks that there might be a benefit, he'll actually calculate both for us.
Yeah.
Right. So taxes. And this was in the back of my mind, I knew I'd heard about marginal tax rate, but I don't think I remember hearing about effective tax rate. So this was something new that I learned from getting ready for this webinar. So there were these two different tax rates that we need to talk about. One is this marginal tax rate, which is the highest tax bracket that your taxable income falls in, or another way to say it is that last dollar that you earn falls into which bracket, and that is your marginal tax rate. And then the effective tax rate is going to be a percentage of your taxable income that you actually end up paying in taxes. So that right there tells me that these two are probably not the same. So let's do a problem involving Aiden. So Aiden has a gross income. Again, there's some vocab that we would probably have to talk about with students. Gross income of $63,000. So good for Aiden. He's making some money and takes the standard deductions. So right there, again, that is vocab and language that my guess most of the students that I teach would need some explanation on what that means. And Aiden's total taxes due are $6,628. So if we go back for 1 second, let me run back to the bracket. So Aiden, I'm guessing is filing single, and he's making 63,000. So what would Aiden's marginal tax rate be? He's making 63. Let's see if we can at least read this table correctly. So I think we're getting lots of 22s.
Lots of 22s.
I agree, right? So anything from 41,775 up to 89,075, you're in that 22% tax bracket filing singly as a single person. So, okay, got that. So he's in the 22% tax bracket. So what is their taxable income? So his taxable income wasn't 6,628. Was it
That was his
63,000
taxes, yeah.
then?
So that was his gross income, but the taxable income, you have to take into account the standard deduction. So in 2022, that was $12,950.
So we start with his 63,000. So we start with the 63,000 and we
And
take
can you
off.
flip to your calculator screen again?
Dang it.
That's okay.
See, it's probably good that I just normally host these things and I don't present. What was the standard deduction again? Can you remind me of that?
Sure. The standard deduction was $12,950.
Man.
That's okay. We'll try it again.
All right. Aiden makes 63,000
Correct.
and we're going to take off 12,950.
You got it.
Okay, so that means that his taxable income is 50,050.
Correct. That is correct.
And his marginal tax rate is 22%.
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So we got one, we got two.
So the effective tax rate, if you round to the nearest hundredth of percent, those of you that know how to figure out the effective tax rate, that's great. You can go ahead and pop that into the chat. But Mike, if you go to the next screen, it does tell us that the effective tax rate is the total taxes due divided by Aiden's taxable income. So in this case, we were told his taxes due were $6,628 divided by his $50,050. And then why multiply by 100? That will give you, that goes back to what Mike was saying at the beginning. That gives you then that percentage.
So his marginal tax rate is 22%,
Correct.
but his effective tax rate is 13.24%. So
Right.
then I like the question at the bottom there, where where does 66,628 come from, right? So if I take 22% times 50,050, I'm guessing I'm probably not going to get 6,628.
Right. Right. So here we broke it down for you a little bit, going through each one of these tax rates. So for instance, at the bracket of 10%, it goes up to 10,275. Remember, this was 2022. So if we multiply that by our decimal 10 hundredths, we get $1,027.50. So that's how much he owed at the 10% tax rate. So then to find how much we still have for income, we have to take his $50,050 and subtract then that 10,275. So we still need to tax $39,775. So moving on to then the 12%. Now this is where it can get interesting or surprising. Your students might not be aware, and this was one of those things that I learned from doing this, is that you need to subtract the range at 12% to get what amount should be taxed at 12%. So here the range is your $31,500. So we said that we still have $39,775 left to tax. So 31,500 of that is going to be taxed at 12%. And then that's where we get the $3,780. So hopefully you are still following along with us. And this would be one thing that I would not just fly through this with my students. Like, we would break this down and go over each one of these separately, and talk about, okay, again, where did this money come from? I'm such a visual person that I would be having, like columns and visuals on the money coming out. That's just me. That's the way it works, kind of thing. So
Like, I think this might be good almost in a spreadsheet too.
yes, exactly. And we did talk about that. You can use the TI technology with the spreadsheet as well. So here, after the 12%, we have $8,275 that still need to be taxed in the 22%, which then would give you $1,820.50. So when you add each of those brackets up, the amount that you owe in each of those brackets, that's where he gets the $6,628. And once again, I told you I'm a visual learner. So Mike, if you go to the next screen, it has a summary of this to kind of show you again, this is what it looks like, to see where they came up with how much Aiden owes in taxes.
So I bet if I ask my students, Aiden makes $63,000, his marginal tax rate is 22%. Was he owing taxes? Besides part of my class being really confused with the vocabulary and such, the students that think that they know what to do, I'm guessing would try to multiply 22% times $63,000. And even if we take the standard deduction off of that, take 22% of the whatever it was, the 50,000 and change, I think they would try to do that. Like, I don't think most of my students would realize that his taxable income of $50,050 is actually like tiered, where of that 50,000, this portion of it gets taxed at 10%. This next portion gets taxed at a certain percent. And it's funny that like we're talking about this right now, because I told you I just did my taxes a couple weeks ago. And if I can just tell a real quick story. So full disclosure, my wife and I don't make a ton of money, but we both are employed and we file as a married couple. And so we are currently in the 22% tax bracket. We are definitely closer to the 83,000 than we are to the 178,000. And so I was talking to my accountant, I'm like, man, if we could like somehow shed some of our income, like maybe we could put more money towards like our 403B or whatever, maybe the HSA that we contribute to, and I could dip below the 83,550, then I would be in the 12% tax bracket. Like, that sounds like that would be awesome. And he's like, well, hold on, Mike. And he thankfully reminded me of the fact that even though I'm in the 22% tax bracket as my, marginal tax bracket, let's just say that as a joint couple, we make $85,000, that roughly $1,500 that I'm in the 22% tax bracket, that is the $1,500 that's actually being taxed at that 22%, not my entire income of my $85,000. And that was something that I definitely need to be reminded about. And I'm guessing students might find that interesting too. So I didn't necessarily need to try and like find all these really creative ways of trying to shed, $1,500 or whatever it was to try and get me under a certain amount to get me out of a certain tax bracket. Because if you're newly into that tax bracket, you're not paying a lot of that percent, that marginal rate anyway.
Yeah. So you made some really good points that, and watching the chat here, it's been really interesting too. Lynn had put that there's a great activity or great video for this activity, and there is. Next Gen had a really good video attached that showed these different brackets and how the money is moved and things like that. And I think you said too, students will find this interesting. I find whenever I talk about money, students find it interesting. So if we can take some of these mathematical concepts and put them into situations, even though taxes are complicated and they're difficult, it's important for them to start being exposed to these now. So I think that's awesome.
Definitely. So the one part that I was hoping that we were going to have a little more time for tonight that I don't think we're going to make is whenever Lindsay and I were talking about these tax brackets, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, this is a piecewise function.
Yes.
And so then I started thinking, like, the reason why I love teaching piecewise functions, and I didn't initially, whenever I started teaching, I was like, I hated piecewise functions. My students weren't good at them. I wasn't good at teaching it. But I got a lot better because now I kind of reloop a lot of really important concepts, functions, domain, range, all this really good stuff. And the thing that I love that Johnny created, he did this on the Inspire, but you can also do it on the 84, the TI-Nspire and CE. Both handle piecewise functions really nicely. It's set up as a template. Anyway, I love this kind of visual. And I think, I forget who mentioned it early on, but someone had mentioned, like, look at that gap between the 12% and the 22%. Like that's a visual there that I really like to see. And then Johnny being the math whiz that he is. So there's the piecewise function that he created on the Inspire. And we're going to include that in the documents, by the way, in case you want to take a look at that on the Inspire.
Right. And notice too, somebody had mentioned in the chat about tax brackets changing. So now we're looking at the projection for 2024. So that's why you can see now those numbers have gotten, the tax brackets are the same in terms of the percent, but the numbers in the tax brackets have gotten higher.
Thanks for reminding me about that because I forgot to mention that.
Yes.
And so check this out. So what Johnny did is Johnny calculated a function for the effective tax rate versus the marginal tax rate. And as soon as I saw this, Lindsay and I were talking, and I'm like, I wonder like where the largest difference is between marginal and effective. And so Lindsay put it so eloquently. Would you say like that would be
Right. So it was like, we want to find out how we can make the most amount of money and pay the least amount of tax.
right? So, other vocab that we could talk about here, like continuity, things being discontinuous. I just I love how that all got put together. Anyway, we're running a little bit short on time, and so I'm gonna click a little bit on here and just some reminders. If you like what you saw tonight, Lindsay and I did a webinar a few years ago now. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it was. That was on math and financial literacy. We specifically did a credit card activity, a simple interest activity, and a compound interest activity, and that can be viewed on demand. Feel free to check that out. Also, I gave the link for the Next Gen Personal Finance website because I hope that we could spend a couple minutes looking at that website. And again, I talk too much, so I apologize, but at least you can check that website out on your own. It's really great. And then whenever you leave the webinar tonight, a survey will appear in your browser. And as you're filling out that survey, just some things to think about. If there's something else financially literacy specific that you want to see, we'd love to hear about it. And then as well, just kind of be thinking, what do you think you need more of? Do you need more lessons to use with your students, or do you need more PD content for you to improve your financial literacy ability? So with that, I'm going to move things back over to Ruth because I think she has some stuff to give away. Sorry, Ruth, I moved things back.
I was talking, but you know, that muting thing, it got me. So the chat is still going. So if you have questions or comments, put them in the chat. Mike and Lindsay are going to be looking at the chat to see if things still need to go in there before we close it out for tonight. I have put in a link to tonight's documents. So keep up with the chat there. You'll also be getting a link to tonight's documents and the recording in your email that you used for registering. So documents, a link to the documents, a link to certificate of attendance. That's coming right now.
And they also get a link to the recording too. So this all happens in email in a couple of days. So, you know, if you're missing anything, just hang tight.
Yeah, it'll happen. Mike, somebody had requested is it possible to put the link to the May 20th?
Yep.
Yes, I think
Previous
it's linked
one.
in the PowerPoint. So
Somebody's telling me the link's not working. So which link is that? Certificate of attendance or documents?
I think the documents, it kind of went by. Yeah, documents. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll work on that while we're talking about the drawings here. But you will get a correct link in an email follow-up. Let's see, drawings. Yes, so I used my random integer generator while we were working there. I had to kind of get off task because I was looking at tax charts and all of that, and I went, oops, you got to do a drawing here. So the winner of the TI calculator is Lauren Todd.
Yeah.
Lauren, congratulations, Lauren. Okay. And Mike, I think you were going to tell us about another drawing for today.
Yeah, we normally just do one, but we're going to do one more tonight as we're wrapping things up. Lindsay, Johnny, Ashurst, myself, and Jenny Bay Williams wrote a book connecting math and financial literacy for grades K through 5, and we'd like to give away to one lucky winner of that as well. So do we have another name, Ruth?
We do. Sarah Rupright. Congratulations, Sarah.
Awesome, Sarah. Congratulations. Give me a couple days, but we will get some information from you so we can get that book sent out to you.
Okay, so I'm going to put that link in again for the documents. I just tested it and it worked, so I might not have copied it all when I put it in the link the first time. You will be getting it in email when they hook you up with the recording and certificate of attendance, so we'll try that. I think that's it for me. Remember, Mike invited you to complete the survey to provide other information, questions, comments. Oh, I just saw a great thing in the link. We keep saying somebody won a book, and it's what book is that they won? So you might want to put that in the chat. We hear who wrote it and what it's about, but it's a little more information about that.
Yes, and the book, the edition we wrote is K through 5. So if elementary is your passion on how to teach financial literacy early, which is one of mine, that's what this particular book is about. But they also have middle school and high school levels as well in the series.
I think that's it for me.
Thanks, everyone. It was exciting to have you with us tonight. I hope you got some good stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Look for your email with information about the recording and the documents and your certificate of attendance. And remember, these are recorded. You can view them on demand, not just tonight's, but previous ones as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.